because one topic that I want to talk about before we close today is the practical design philosophy of Primare, and I'm curious how this really informs choices and decisions that are made when all different aspects are being considered, right? So this is everything like we've alluded to in the past, pricing, design, feature set. So can you tell me a little bit about that process and
Oh
and
yeah.
how that
Yeah.
really impacts the products?
Well, in fact, it's great that we've been talking about the SPA 25 because this one has two of the elements that maybe best exemplify this primary practical design approach. And again, that's based on this kind of Scandinavian Swedish concept of lagom, not too much, not too little, everything in balance and proportion, just right. So we want to make sure that any feature we put in here contributes fundamentally to better performance. And as the marketing person, I know that if we put certain elements into our feature list, a consumer will look at that and be comforted to know that they have all the latest features. And that's an easy way of designing a product. Additionally, there are things that I know that can be very eye-catching on a sales floor that when you get them home, you
They don't
find that you
matter.
really never use them. It's kind of
Yeah.
like the buying your flat panel television in a big box store. Those warehouses are massive. And so that 85-inch flat screen TV doesn't look that big in that warehouse setting. And the minute you get it home, you realize it's just dominating and you're on the phone. Hey, that 65-inch will be just fine. Thank you very much. I need to return this 85. And so that happens a lot. And so I'll give you two examples. One is the front display and the other is video switching, video resolution specifications. And so I'll do, sure which I should do first, but let's start out with the display. This will be somewhat similar.
Yeah, and
We have
people
had a
can see
lot of
that
people say,
here now.
yeah, and so you can see it's relatively small. It doesn't dominate the appearance of the product, and it's meant to provide or continue that elegant, simple design approach that we have become known for. Now, we've been doing OLED displays. We were one of the first actually to incorporate OLED displays. And we have examined the idea of having a large color touchscreen display. In part because when we started 36 years ago, we included remote control as a necessary feature for the best possible experience when listening to your system. Now, at that point, remote control was considered evil in the worlds of high-end audio, in part because you had to inject that remote control system into the signal path. And people would go to the length, including we did, to put motorized volume pots with discrete resistors at each volume setting or at each attenuation setting. But knowing that being able to control that volume from the listening position was the best spot. So we believe in having this level of control, but from the listening position. And so we began to examine these large-scale touchscreen displays. We realized, well, wait, we don't want to go to the unit to touch. We don't want to have to be able to kind of kneel down in front of the unit to touch these controls. We want to do it from the palm of your hand. We want to do it from the listening position. And oddly enough, I happen to have one of these devices here. We live in a world filled with amazing displays in the palm of your hand from which you can do this control. And so that made no sense to us to have the controls on the front panel, let alone, no matter how big the display is, you're still not going to see the relevant information you want to see better from 2 to 3 meters away as you can in the palm of
Absolutely.
your hand.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with that in mind, we also recognize that by not doing that, we could avoid the cost. It would have to be reflected into the retail price. We avoided the long-term maintenance because these things require firmware updates to make sure that they accommodate the input signal that's coming in from the various sources. And all of those things led us to believe that we shouldn't include it because then we could put the money into the performance aspects of the product. We could put it into the amplification, into the power supply, all of these other things that actually contributed to a better performance. And the other thing too, and it may be not in my place to say this in this platform, but we also grew to understand that there was a little bit of a cynical design approach in putting these on the front displays because we understand that they look cool. They look really great. When I was a dealer, I sold Macintosh amplifiers, and
Yeah.
there was nothing like that big display. And I sold audio research amplifiers, and they have that lovely see-through display now. But those displays provide relevant information. In a lot of the displays we looked at, we noticed that when you went to the VU meter, the readout of power, it was only showing you input and only on digital input.
Hmm.
It didn't show you analog, and it didn't show you output, which is what would be the most important information to have. And so while we recognize that they look great and they're very cool, and we're a little bit jealous, as you maybe can tell, it ultimately was not something that passed our logom test, our Primare practical design approach test. So we've included just these displays as needed that pop up with your input and the volume, important things that you need to see as we go on. Now, the other example in the SPA 25 of this practical design approach is our video switching. About the time we began to design this little thing called HDMI 2.1 was announced. And in that build list was a bunch of stuff. And one of the things we knew we wanted, and that was eARC, because of the difficulty in getting standard ARC to work effectively in so many different settings. However, as we began to look at the other specifications, we realized that it wasn't really going to pass the practical design approach test, because almost all of those features, all of those specifications were related more to high speed, high frame rate, high resolution gameplay, 4K 120, 8K 60. And at the point where we began the design, there weren't even any chips for testing. And that's always a no-go for us. And as a result, we decided, well, let's hang back and let's see what happens to this. And let's do some research into the applicability, exactly just how important will this be? And I'd like to think that we were real savvy in that, but it was just coincidence that the first implementation of some of the HDMI 2.1 chips were found to be faulty. And so we were able to avoid the expense that would have cost having to rectify that. But more importantly, as we drilled down to it, and as I mentioned previously, Malmo is a huge game design center. In fact, I have in the apartment building in which I am at this moment, one of their chief designers and their human resources person for a company called Massive. Now, Massive is part of Ubisoft. They just got through designing the 4 Avatar games that are meant to go with the 4 films. And then they've moved on to another little franchise that I don't think is going to be that successful called Star Wars. I don't know if you've heard it, but they're doing that. And so they, in fact, it was funny to have contact with the human resources person, because she would do her intern barbecue as the interns were leaving every summer. And I would go down and get a contact high from all those guys and we talk about current gaming. But she went from hiring 200 people to now 1,200 people that are working on these games. And Massive now has an entire city block here, a 5-story old sewing machine manufacturing facility that's a city block from which they work. And so tapping into those guys and then talking to specifically their director of gaming culture, and that is a title, whose job is to ensure that the consumer is satisfied with the performance of the games. When I mentioned that I wanted to have lunch with him and talk about HDMI 2.1, he put his head in his hands.
I bet.
Well, and the thing is that an HDMI is really good at this, in that promoting advanced video culture, but oftentimes a little bit in advance of when it is actually matured and truly available. And so in talking to this guy from Massive, he said, okay, here's the problem. It's in 3 phases. And part of it is with us. Part of it is with the game designers. It's really hard to do this. We have to ensure that all our games are backward compatible all the way to SD, and then have them available all the way into the highest frame rates. That is a nearly impossible task, but we're doing it and we're making effective games. But the problem then, after that point, is our art. Will our designs withstand the scrutiny of something at these resolutions? We know frame rate is an interesting thing, but we'll get to that in a second, is will our art actually be benefit from being at these resolutions? And I suggested that it sounded similar to when the first Hobbit movies were brought out after the great success of The Lord of the Rings. Peter Jackson did them at 48 frames per second, and immediately people started criticizing the video look of the films and how you could see that they were wearing prosthetics and beards and hairpieces, and the CGI wasn't quite as good. So that when he did the next installment, he actually downgraded the video for the re-release of that first film and kept it lower for the theatrical release of the second film. Because the gaming culture director said, yeah, that's it entirely. Yeah. We have to be very careful about this. And then there's the speed, the frame rate. Research has been done with professional gamers that when they're looking at 4K 120 or 8K 60, they can't see the difference. If you do them an A/B thing, they can't see the difference. The interesting thing is that when they play the game at these higher frame rates, their gaming is better. Mm-hmm. They can't see the difference, but the gaming is better. Why is that? Well, because they're using an absolute ultra high speed custom built gaming PC into a custom built peripheral view display. And so the next thing that the gaming culture director talked about was where you're putting these and how they're being used, how these games are being used. Most of the consoles can't consistently do this high level of resolution and high frame rate. And you really need to do it in a gaming PC tied directly to a monitor. And more importantly, he said, what you're talking about is a party game, having it in a surround sound system. If anyone's doing this high frame rate, high speed gaming, it's going to be with headphones, microphone, in a PvP, a player versus player scenario. And a party game is never above 4K 30, rarely 4K 60. And so there'll be no game really designed for this platform. And more importantly, even when someone is doing a PvP game, they will downgrade that signal to 4K 30, maybe 4K 60 at the most, to make sure that there is no delay in the delivery of the game. There's no buffering, there's no lag. They will do that already because nothing's in place. And then the final thing that fell into place was that when you talk about cable length, all of a sudden, when you talk about limits of cable length to connect these devices together, people are talking on average of 3 meters being maximum before you get signal loss. Some people will say 5, others will say 1 meter. And all that communicated to us was that you don't want to have an additional length of cable and a video switching in the way of getting that signal to your display. And so everyone that we talked to, the game designers, gaming culture directors, everyone said, plug your game into the display.
Right.
That way you ensure getting the best possible video quality. It is not a problem getting the audio sent either through HDMI eARC or even Toslink to your audio processor to get the kind of sound quality that you're going to need to be able to have the best performance. And so we determined that it would be a 4K 60, the best looking 4K 60 video switcher we could possibly have on that for when you want to connect these devices that you want to have connected. But if you're looking for high speed game rate, you should go and plug it into your device, into your display. And this is that extension then of that Primare practical design approach. It's not what, as much as it breaks my marketing heart, is going to be most effective on a features list to sell a product. It is what is going to provide the best possible performance for the investment that any of our customers is going to make in any of our products.